Hey everybody, Dave here, and I'm back to talk a little bit more about the Curtain Call Adventure Path for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. For those new here, well, first of all, welcome, glad to have you with us, but you should be aware that when I do these overviews of the adventure paths, I do them in two parts. So this is part two. Now, part one has a sort of general overview of the themes and the general story of the adventure path, but I try to sort of dance around heavy plot twists and big spoilers and that sort of thing. And then in this second video is where I get into all of that missing content from the first video. So, long story short, this video is going to be building on information that was given to you in the first video. So if you haven't watched part one, please make sure you go ahead and do so. Also, talking about spoilers, the second video is going to have a lot more spoilers, a lot more content that was not included in that first video. However, I do want to say that just for time, I'm not going to go over every minute detail of everything that occurs in the adventure path. I'm only going to be hitting sort of the major highlights so that this video doesn't completely sprawl out of control and become longer than anybody would ever want. Also want to make sure that everybody is aware of two things. First of all, I was provided these adventures from Paizo, and second of all, I have only read the books. I have not had an opportunity to actually play the game, and that is one of the main reasons why I don't call these videos reviews, because I feel like it's weird to say I'm reviewing a game that I haven't played. But just be aware that I will give you some context for my opinions and my beliefs, but I haven't played it, so I have no idea about encounter balance and how certain mechanical things are going to be perceived by the players and if they'll enjoy it or not and that sort of thing. So just keep that context in mind as we get through this. And I also want to mention that this particular adventure path, one of the locations that is extremely important to it is the city of Vire. And Vire is a city that was detailed in the Hell's Rebels adventure path back in first edition. And the reason why I bring this up right now with the sort of disclaimer section of my video is I don't have Hell's Rebels, so I haven't read it. I don't know all of the context for the city of Vire, so I may miss out on some of the nuance and some returning themes and locations and that sort of thing. So if there's anything about the city of Vire that you're familiar with that I may have missed, then please make sure that you include that in the comments below so that everybody out there can benefit from that information that I don't have. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the portion of the video that I call Story Time with Dave. This is where I go through the content of all three books of this adventure path that goes from level 11 all the way to level 20, and I fill in some of the blanks with information that was missing from part one. So buckle up, get a drink. This might take a little bit of time, but I will also let you know that there should be chapters included in the video. So if I'm covering something that you already know or you don't feel like you need more information on, you can skip to the next piece. And also, if you just want to skip directly to my overall thoughts and opinions if I think this AP is great or lousy and not have to sit through the entire retelling of the story, there should be a chapter break that will let you do that as well. So starting from the beginning, Chapter 1, Book 1 is kind of a prologue to the campaign. And in fact, the author of that book even uses language to the effect of, the adventure doesn't really begin in earnest until Chapter 2. And in Chapter 1, what happens is whatever big bad, whatever villain your players faced in their journey from level 1 to level 11, that creature, that being, that person has returned. And they have reappeared in the nation of Osirion, which is very much like Egypt, and they're causing trouble. And so this is our plot hook to draw the players back in, that their big enemy is back, and they need to go put them down one more time. As you probably know from watching the first video, this is an important step in the campaign, as this is, pardon the pun, I was about to say it sets the stage, and forgive me for that one, but it does. It sets the tone for the rest of the the campaign or to some extent. But what it does is it sets the villain because the players are going to be creating an opera during this adventure path. And the opera is going to be the heroic tale of them defeating this villain. So whoever they face in the prologue or chapter 1 of book 1, this is a character, a villain that's going to be prominent throughout the AP as the villain of the opera that they're creating, and another little fun little twist later that I'll get into. So, for example, if your players played Abomination Vaults from level 1 to level 11, then they hear that Belcora is back, and she's in Osirion causing trouble. So the players travel there, and the adventure begins with them in Osirion at a series of caverns called, I believe, the Choke, and there are all kinds of fun little taunts greeting them when they get there. They find a series of people bound on stakes, and they are all friends and allies and significant friendly NPCs from their previous adventure. And if they explore it a little more, they realize that these are actually dead gnolls that have had an illusion cast over them. Just one of the ways that this area sort of reflects and echoes their previous adventures and taunts the players and to drive them even further into wanting to have this confrontation with their returned villain. So they go through this area, and ultimately what they discover at the end of it is their villain has in fact not returned. This is in fact a creature known as a brainchild. And a brainchild is a kind of mental construct that is born from all of the fear and negative emotions that are caused by a villain in their lifetime. So in this case, when Belcora or whoever the primary villain of the first adventure of 1 through 11 adventure was, all of the trauma that they caused, all the mental anguish that they caused, has coalesced into a being called a brainchild. And this brainchild has appeared in Osirion and is what is actually causing these problems. Now, once the players deal with the brainchild and they return to their respective home, they are contacted by a theater producer director named Fallenta. And she contacts them and says, I want to create an opera based on your heroics and your adventures. Would you please meet with me so we can talk about this? Assuming the players do so, they will travel to the Silver City of Kintargo that not so long ago was liberated from the nation of Cheliax in the Hell's Rebels adventure path for Pathfinder 1st Edition. And she meets them, they talk, and she ultimately would like them to audition, so to speak. And the audition isn't to prove that they're necessarily great actors or theater directors or what have you. The audition is to prove that they are, in fact, the heroes they claim to be, and not just any schmoes trying to capitalize on the fame that was created by the players' party. And so this takes place in a ruined theater that Fallenta has cast some illusion magic on to make it look nice and neat. And there's a series of little challenges that they have to navigate through to prove that they are who they say they are. Now, towards the end of this audition, it is revealed that there is an underground series of tunnels. I think it used to be used by smugglers and contraband thieves and so forth back in the old days that still exists underneath the theater. And there is a hole to this area that is covered by the illusion that Fallenta cast on it. But the players eventually are going to discover that hole, and that a number of the people who were hired to participate in the audition as stage extras have disappeared. They've actually been kidnapped and taken down this hole. So this transitions from a skill-based series of challenges for the players and into this exploration as they go to rescue the theater workers who have been captured. And it's revealed that the person who kidnapped the extras for this audition is a necromancer who goes back to the days of when Cheliax was in power and has been basically hiding underground ever since that revolution. And she refers to herself as the final herald of the Ashen Man. The Ashen Man is a religious figure that is believed to herald a coming apocalypse, who is, I believe he is a manifestation of Asmodeus's wrath. So the god Asmodeus is the patron god of Cheliax, and his rage and anger at Kintargo being able to succeed successfully from Cheliax, not just Kintargo the Sea, but the entire nation that it is in, has born this figure, the Ashen Man. In truth, you learned that the Ashen Man is a Hundun. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me if I'm not. Which goes back to the Doomsday Dawn prophecy, which I believe was part of the playtest materials, the playtest adventure for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But at any rate, your players go down these tunnels, presumably encounter the final herald of the Ashen Man, and retrieve and rescue, hopefully, all of the people that were captured. And after that, this is all sufficient enough proof to Fallenta to believe that the players are who they say they are, and offers to make them co-producers of the opera. And one of their first responsibilities as co-producers is to secure a venue. And she very much wants to hold this opera in I forget if it's the Royal Opera House or the Grand Opera House. It's the major opera house in Kintargo. That I think there is a mention that back in the days of Cheliax and the Hell's Rebels Adventure Path, this opera house was the headquarters of perhaps the big bad of that AP. This is one of those areas where those familiar with AP might want to fill in some blanks in the comments for others. But this is a significant venue. So in order to secure the right to perform there, she asked the players to go to this extremely fancy party and try to secure permission for them to hold their opera there. I'm not going to go into detail of that. I don't think there's any major twist that I admitted from the first video, but it is like a 10-page long grand social encounter space. At the end of which, hopefully, they should secure permission to perform in the opera house. This brings us into the final chapter of Book 1. And this is when Fallenta is greeted by a representative of a criminal organization called the Dragonfly Society, who is coming to collect some debt, so to speak. So this is where it's revealed that there's more to Fallenta than she has let on. In fact, Fallenta is not her real name. She was born as a woman named Imogena, and she lived in Kintargo back when it was under Chelaxian rule, and she was a budding playsmith. She was starting out in the theater, writing stories, producing plays, and so forth. And she wrote and produced a play that was not kind. It was a scathing satire of the Chelaxian government. And as you might imagine, from a tyrannical, lawful, evil government, they didn't much care for that. So she needed to get out of this city. So she hired some folks to smuggle her out of the city, to stage her death as Imogena so no one would follow her, and smuggle her to the city of Vire, which is sort of a wretched hive of scum and villainy, not too far. I think it's like 40 miles from Kintargo, where she is able to get this criminal organization, the Dragonfly Society, to craft her a new papers, a new identity as Fallenta. And she is now returning to Kintargo after gathering fame, producing plays elsewhere as under the identity of Fallenta. So the Dragonfly Society has sort of held their knowledge of her true identity over her head for the last like 20 years, and has been increasing the amount of money that they are demanding from her to basically blackmail her. If you don't pay us, we're going to go to the Chilaxian government and we're going to say Imagina is still alive and she can be found in Cantargo under the name Fallenta, and they would certainly dispatch agents to go and kill her. So now that she's back in Cantargo and she's starting to produce this massive opera that's starting to get some buzz, the Dragonfly Society shows back up. And they say, hey, look, we're going to up the payments. What we want you to do is we want you to surrender creative control, complete creative control of the opera to the Dragonfly Society. And we want you to give up, it doesn't give an exact number, it says like the lion's share, the overwhelming majority of all profits that the play generates will also go to the Dragonfly Society. Fallenta isn't about to agree to that, so she strikes a deal with the Dragonfly Society. And she offers the services of the players, without the players even knowing this, to help the Dragonfly Society solve one of their little problems. And, hey, if I can get these heroes to go to Vire and do a job for you, can we just call this even? And the Dragonfly Society agrees to that. So, assuming that the players agree to help Fallenta or Imagina with this, they will travel to Vire and meet with a representative of the Dragonfly Society, who basically says, we know you have reputations as heroes. We're not going to ask you to assassinate anybody unless you really want to, which we wouldn't mind. But we have a task that we'd like you to do that's not going to be hopefully reprehensible to them. Basically, there is a competitor within the city of Vire named Lady Augusta Wormwood, who leads an organization, a competing organization, that stole a crate of magic items as it was being transferred to the Dragonfly Society from some parts unknown in payment for services that they rendered that they don't get into what those services are either. But bottom line, a crate of magic items was arrived in port that was coming to the Dragonfly Society, but before it could get to the Dragonfly Society, Lady Augusta Wormwood's agents stole it out from under them, and they would like the players to go retrieve this crate of magic items. And if they happen to kill Lady Augusta Wormwood, they wouldn't feel too awful about that. But really, the assignment is get us that crate of magic items, and we will cancel all remaining debt with Fallenta and say everything's cool. So this kicks off a pretty straightforward dungeon crawl of the players going to retrieve this crate, and ultimately, we'll assume that they succeed in that. They get the crate, they return it. They discovered that Lady Augusta Wormwood is backed by the Church of Norgorber. In fact, Vire, as it turns out, is one of the greatest concentration of Norgorber worship in the entire world, which I don't think is very widely known because, hey, he's like a god of lies and secrets, so that's probably something that he's been able to keep a little bit under wraps. But again, we're talking about Vire, which I've said I don't know a whole lot about, so if that's not right, again, let me know. But anyway, when they retrieve this, they are told by the Dragonfly Society, thank you, we're going to keep our word. They destroy all evidence of Imagina, and all debts cleared. And they say to the players, you know what, you did such a great job. We're going to let you choose any one item out of this crate for you to keep. But also, you might want to keep in mind that the Church of Norgorber isn't going to be super happy with the players. And they basically, I think there's even a line where the agent of the Dragonfly Society even says, if I was you, I would take that treasure you just got and throw it in the lake and just try to pretend that this never happened, because the Church of Norgorber is not going to take kind to this, and they're coming for you. And that's pretty much where book 1 concludes. So now going into book 2. The first chapter of book 2 largely plays out the way that I described in the first video. Essentially, the next task that is granted to them by Fallenta is to secure someone to play the villain in their opera that they're making. And she knows of a famous diva named Oriole, who has been retired for some years. But Oriole has an uncanny ability to mimic voices and to take on roles of any sort of physical stature and movements and whatnot. So basically, this is just a way to say whoever the villain that they fought in the first levels 1 through 11 was, Oriole is able to portray that figure convincingly on stage. So they travel to, well, there's a series of investigations to find out where Oriole has gone to, because ever since they retired, they've been laying low. But they discover that Oriole now has taken up residence in the Shackles. They travel to Oriole's manor there and find it under siege by a group of Fae. They have to break that siege and do a little bit of a dungeon crawl through the house, dealing with Fae as well as magical defenses of Orioles, to eventually arrive to Oriole. Now, the one piece about this that I omitted as spoiler from part 1 is that even though the siege is being conducted by a large group of Fae, this group of Fae is being led by a brine dragon. And this brine dragon collects mortals as pets. And the brine dragon has come here to collect Oriole to put in a cage and be her songbird in a cage back at her lair, wherever brine dragons like to call home out there in the Shackles. So the players are going to have to contend with this dragon as well. At the end of chapter 1 of book 2, assuming everything goes well, they will have convinced Oriole to join them. And as mentioned in part 1, they're going to have to improvise some theater in front of them, in front of Oriole, to get Oriole to agree to join this opera that they're making. So this is going to be one of many places where if your players are a bunch of theater kids, they are going to this will be their jam. They're going to love this scene. Now, this is going to then kick off chapter 2 of book 2 when the players return to Kintargo. They need to secure some sponsors. Again, I'm not going to go into this area because I think I pretty much covered it well enough in the first video. But I will say that one of the people that they meet with is Mayalari Dekur, the headmistress of Lady Dekur's School for Girls, which if you played the first, second edition Adventure Path, Age of Ashes, she is a prominent figure in book 3 of that Adventure Path. That book 3 of that Adventure Path, spoilers, takes place in Kintargo. So if your players have played that, are familiar with that, it might be fun to reunite with her in her very interesting school for girls. After that, the players need to start doing a lot of the just basic support work of running an opera. They have to cast performers, they have to select a composer, they have to hire someone to build sets, they have to hire someone to do special effects. The wonderful thing about being a Pathfinder theater there is we've got wizards and sorcerers and all kinds of people with magic that can do special effects during the show that you're going to want to hire. Fallenta took it upon herself to hire a seamster to make costumes. And all while the players are doing this, there are sprinkled throughout, there are references to the Ashen Man, and that the cult of the Ashen Man is growing in Kintargo, and sort of advising everybody that the end is near, the apocalypse is coming. Even though they may have defeated the so-called final Herald of the Ashen Man cult is still present and is active, and has a presence in this story that they sprinkle these hints, graffiti and small talk and whispers and so forth. At some point, it becomes apparent that someone is sabotaging the production. They're rigging sets and creating hazards, so grips and people working there are injuring themselves. And this begins an investigation that ultimately reveals that the sabotage to the stage was conducted by members of the cult of the Ashen Man. Again, the cult who worships this representation of Asmodeus bringing the final days. The players go, they investigate, they eventually catch up with the cult, and it's revealed that the cult of the Ashen Man was hired by the Church of Norgorber and Vire to conduct the sabotage, likely as retaliation to what they did at the end of Book 1 with assisting the Dragonfly Society and stealing the Creative Magic items from Lady Augusta Wormwood and possibly killing Lady Augusta Wormwood. I mean, the fate of exactly what the players do there is left a little bit ambiguous, but anyway you cut it, they've made a very powerful enemy in the Church of Norgorber. And then at this time, another thing that happens is the ghost of Barzillai Thrune appears. Barzillai Thrune, I believe, was the big bad of the Hell's Rebels adventure path, and his spirit returns and starts haunting the opera house. And after the players investigate this, they come to discover that it is an illusion that was cast by a member of the cult of the Ashen Man, but another touch point of the cult of the Ashen Man. This progresses into chapter 3 of book 2, and Oriole, who they hired and rescued from a brine dragon in a phase siege in chapter 1 of book 2, has gone missing. And so this sets off an investigation where they learn that Oriole has been kidnapped, and specifically has been kidnapped by Fenton. And Fenton is the seamster who was hired by Fallenta to start making all the costumes for the opera. It turns out that Fenton is not who he says he is. He is, in fact, a worshiper of Norgorber, and he has captured Oriole and taken them back to Vire. So this is another time when the players have to pack their bags and head to Vire for the remainder of chapter 3 and 4 of book 2. They go through a series of investigations that leads to a gambling hall where the players participate in a gauntlet of deadly games for the amusement of the audience in attendance. And if they are successful, they are granted a meeting with the proprietor of that gambling hall, who can direct them to where Fenton has taken Oriole, which is an old textile mill. That transitions to the final chapter of book 2, where the players go to the textile mill to rescue Oriole. This is a large dungeon crawl that leads eventually to an encounter with Fenton, who is in truth a worshiper of Father Skinsaw. So this is the first place in the AP where we start to really get into the history of the Church of Norgorber and how they function. Norgorber is a deity who was once a living person and who succeeded on the test of the Starstone and ascended into godhood, but he is worshipped as basically 4 different people. He has 4 different aspects that each control a portion of his divine realm, and people who worship Norgorber tend to favor worshiping one of these specific aspects. So one of Norgorber's aspects is known as Father Skinsaw, which is a figure revered by the Skinsaw cult, and who represents assassination and murder, that aspect of Norgorber, and not so much lies and deception and some of the other aspects of Norgorber. They specifically focus on murder and assassination. So this set piece of the textile mill culminates with the players encountering Fenton, who is in the guise of Father Skinsaw, who he reveres. And it's a very creepy, it's very suitably creepy environment where it's a room full of mannequins because he was a seamster. So he, a lot of his work was knitting and making costumes and putting them on mannequins and using mannequins to, hold up the fabric as he sewed them and all. But in this room, it's all these mannequins, and it's all a big chapel of sorts to Father Skinsaw, the aspect of Norgorber. And when the players ultimately defeat Fenton, one of these mannequins suddenly animates and moves towards them. And long story short, the players likely realize that this figure that has just animated in this room is, in fact, Norgorber. Not an aspect of Norgorber, not a manifestation, not a follow or a worship or whatever. It is literally the god Norgorber has manifested in this room. And he has a few words for the players, and then he reaches down to Fenton, who is wearing a soul-feeding mask. He has a mask that's a magical item called a soul-feeding mask. And Norgorber rips the soul out of Fenton, puts it in the mask, takes the mask, and then very creepily does a bow to the players and leaves. And that is where book 2 more or less ends, with the players having a brush with an actual true god. Now that brings us to book 3, the final book of this campaign. So book 3, before it gets into the events, it has a section that's all about the history of Norgorber. And this was one of the biggest surprises to me, because Norgorber is a god of secrets, and he's intentionally, I feel, has been, they haven't given us information. Like, we don't know who Norgorber was before he took the trial of the Starstone, because when he did that, it is said that he wiped the memories of everybody who knew him. So to have a section at the beginning of this book that really lays out a lot of his history was a surprise. I'm not going to go into all of it because, again, we don't have time to go through all of it. But in essence, what you learn is, in mortal life, he was a human man named Jaxter Gorb. And Jaxter Gorb sounds familiar and adjacent to the name Nestor Coin, close enough that for me as a Glass Cannon fan, I'm starting my own little special headcanon here. But Jaxter Gorb was a bastard son of a noble in Vire. And he decided to stoke the flames of war. He started a secret propaganda campaign in Vire to ignite the flames of revolt in the city, and disposed his parents, family, and all the other rulers of Vire were disposed of, and a new leadership. I think this is where the Council of Kings and Queens came into power in Vire. And so after he did this, he left the city of Vire and began touring the realm. And in different locations, he took on new identities as his fame began to grow and grow and grow. He was known as Blackfingers, the alchemist, to assassins. In Andoran, he became a leader of the Thieves Guild, known as the Grey Master. In Talador, he became known as the Reaper of Reputation. And a trail of unsolved murders that he leaves behind him became the legend of Father Skinsaw. So in life, he developed separate distinct identities, four separate distinct identities that all rose to fame and legend in their own rights for doing different things. Whether Skinsaw murders, the Grey Master, a master thief, the Reaper of Reputation, a master of secrets and manipulating secrets, and Blackfingers was a master of poisons. So then when he did ascend to godhood after the trial of the Starstone, these four aspects of his being, of his psyche, became four different manifestations of him in godhood as well. Now, those are the four identities that are worshipped by the cult or the church of Norgorber. All this time, he's had a secret fifth aspect that nobody knows about. And that secret fifth aspect is known as the Prince of Propaganda. And that aspect is based on his life before he left Vire. It's based on the work he did to cause the revolt in the war in Vire that removed his parents and the other ruling families from power and instilled the system of kings and queens. And the Prince of Propaganda represents stoking the fires of war, sabotage, war profiteering, and propaganda. So the Church of Norgorber has no idea that there is this secret fifth aspect to him. And he's kept this fifth aspect secret because he fears that if people learned of it, it could undo his control over the realm of secrets, and this could possibly lead to a path that could remove him from godhood. So he's keeping this fifth aspect of himself secret. Now, when Norgorber learned of the conspiracy to kill Gorm, he saw opportunity here. Because he saw a path that he could use the divine power that is released into the realm with the death of a major god like Gorm, and use that power to elevate each of his five aspects into godhood themselves. So he would grant a sense of independence to each of his five aspects, seize some of the power released from the death of Gorm, instill it in these five aspects. They would each individually rise up to godhood, and then Norgorber would effectively cease to be a single god and instead be a pantheon of gods, which would give him even more power and more ability to manipulate the mortal realm. So that is the ultimate goal of Norgorber, and where you'll see this story is going to connect to the God's Reign prophecies and some of the other adventures and other stories in this connected there. So what does any of that have to do with an opera? The answer is not a whole lot, but you'll see the connections in just a bit here. That was all information that's provided in the opening of Book 3, and then it moves into the actual events of the final adventure module. So, Book 3 opens with the players back in Cantargo, and they're meeting with Fallenta, and she introduces them to a new assistant director. She's going to have her hands full on her work, and she needs somebody else to come in and kind of oversee the final polish being done to the sets and the special effects and the costumes and everything else. And the person that she has brought on to be this assistant director is a Shellonite named Duval. And Duval is a very accomplished scholar of the theater. In fact, he has been living in the plane of Nirvana, studying works of art and theater from Nirvana for some time. And he has come on board to kind of shepherd the players and the rest of the cast and crew through Hell Month, the final month before release of this show. So, during this period, there's even more sabotage that's conducted by the Church of Norgorber that the players will have to deal with, and take on a few other tasks to get the show ready for their grand premiere, But once all of those tasks are completed, the opera does finally have its opening night. And as mentioned in video part one, it makes a creative use of the chase mechanics to go through the three acts of the play and determine how successful the play is. And in part one, I said, I'm not going to spoil it, but it ends in a way that nobody will ever forget. And that's where I ended video one. So the remainder of this will be all new information. During the climactic battle at the end of the opera, the backdrop on the stage begins to animate in the form of a large man clad in armor being attacked from behind by a giant red praying mantis who rips the armored figure in half. And the audience they view this and they think, oh, it's just another special effect. It's just part of the show. What exactly is going on? We don't know, but they're not alarmed at seeing this. But what this is it's a representation of the death of Gorm all over the world. When Gorm is killed, that is viewed in different ways by different people around the world. And here it is viewed by the audience in attendance of the opening of this opera as the backdrop animating. After that happens, it starts raining, and as the players or the cast of the play is taking their bows on stage, which might include the players or might not, the players will each be able to choose if they want to actually be actors in the show or not. A fragment of Gorm's armor crashes through the ceiling of the opera and through the center of the stage and embeds itself at the base of the theater. This is where the God's Reign prophecies comes in full swing, as it is raining blood outside and chaos starts to begin. Unknown to anyone or the general populace of Cantargo, deep in the ground beneath Cantargo and beneath the opera house, there is an area called a soul anchor, which is a manifestation of the River of Souls. And this soul anchor, Norgorber correctly predicted that when Gorm dies, a significant portion of his power is going to be drawn right here to the Opera House in Cantargo because it's going to be pulled by the soul anchor to this place. And that's exactly what happened. A fragment of Gorm's armor, which I think is no larger than maybe like a longsword's blade. I don't think it's a giant piece, but even that relatively small piece has tremendous amounts of divine power stored in it, and enough power that Norgorber believes it can be used to fuel the ascension of his different aspects into godhood and form this pantheon. So during this portion of the show, through the ceiling, through the hole made by the falling fragment of Gorm's armor, Norgorber manifests and floats down, retrieves the fragment, and takes his leave. And before the players can really do anything about this, not that they could prevent a god from doing anything about that, something else happens. The soul anchor, reacting with its connection to the River of Souls and the infusion of divine power and an audience full of people who all have the same thing on their mind prior to that, which is the players' battle with their villain. That's the villain of the opera. All of this coalesces together and combines to actually draw the soul of their villain out of the afterlife, out of the great beyond, the boneyard, whatever, and brings that spirit to the stage in the opera house. So whereas in chapter 1 of book 1, the players battled a brainchild that was not truly the big bad of their previous adventure, they now are going to have another confrontation with that same being, and this time is for real. And is infused with more power, so it is a significantly more powerful being than it was back when they fought it at level 10, or level 11, whatever level you had that encounter at. Um, and is a nice, fun, not quite bookend, but almost bookend to that saga. There is some material in the book to help you tailor and create this Risen Nemesis is what they call it. They refer to whoever that being is as the Nemesis throughout the book, and now the players are encountering the Risen Nemesis. And I will say that you might have to do a little bit of work depending on who that creature was and how they died. For example, I don't want to go into details, but there is at least one of the 1 to 11 APs where the final villain is vanquished in such a way that this might not seem like a plausible way for them to return. So you might have to do some work and finesse this a little bit. But that is what happens here. And then after they finish their battle with the Risen Nemesis, there's more chaos that manifests. Again, with the divine power of Gorham being released and the Soul Anchor and the River of Souls and everything, that can be tailored depending on the nature of the opera. It's going to manifest differently if the players did a comedy versus if they did a tragedy, which is, again, a nice little flavor touch to the fact that they just did this grand opera that they've been working on for the last two books of the campaign. So once Norgorber has that fragment, he returns to Vyre. He breaks the fragment into pieces, the fragment of Gorham's armor, and he presents one of those fragments to each of the 4 manifestations. He has these 4 aspects, the Grey Master, Father Skinsaw, Blackfingers, and so on. And he has created a physical manifestation like avatar of that aspect and given them a degree of independence or full independence, and is now granting each of them a fragment of Gorham's armor so that they can perform a ritual and rite to ascend into godhood and form this pantheon. Now, at about this point, an interesting thing happens. The high priest of Norgorber in Vyre contacts the players and says, I've got bad feelings that something's going on with my god, and I think you folks might be the only people who can deal with this. So you're heroes. I know I'm an evil high priest to this evil god that is at odds with you right now, but I think we need to join forces and have an alliance. And the basis for this belief is he believes that these 4 aspects, these 4 manifestations of Norgorber, now that they have independence, are not going to support Norgorber in his ascension to this pantheon. That now that they all have independence, they're all going to turn on Norgorber. And as a high priest of Norgorber, he sees that as being a recipe for ruin, not just for his god and his faith, but then releasing these 4 other deities could have catastrophic results for the city of Vyre and the world beyond. So he wants to form an alliance with the players and basically support them in their return to Vyre to try to locate these 4 different manifestations of Norgorber and defeat them before they can figure out how to harness the power of Gorham's armor and ascend to godhood. So each of these 4 manifestations have their own layers that the players will venture into. Blackfinger has an alchemical library. The Grey Master has a trap-infested underground complex. Father Skinsaw has a prison buried beneath the ruins of a temple to Gorham, and the Reaper of Reputations has an extra-dimensional lair hidden in the closet of a hostel that opens into a library. As the players are doing their investigations, finding these locations, exploring them, At each location, there is a chance for them to uncover deep, deep, deep personal secrets about Gorham, about not Gorham, about Norgorber, and about who he was in life as Jackster Gorm, about how each of his manifestations came to be, about his relationship with his family as a child, and some of the key moments that molded him into the figure that he eventually became. And that's going to be very important when dealing with a god of secrets. Also, each of these manifestations has a different artifact that is related to their aspect with the god Gorm that the players can potentially claim after they explore and encounter and defeat each of these four aspects of the god Norgorber. I feel like I may have said Gorm a couple of times there by mistake, but we're just to be clear, we're focused on the god Norgorber here, not Goram. Um, so while they're doing this, Norgorber has gone to another one of his devout followers in the city of Vire, which is the Queen of Whispers, and encouraged her to impede the player's progress. So the order that they go about tackling these four different aspects is largely up to them, but the Queen of Whispers is going to try to lay some sabotage and ambush them as they go through this section. So that's basically chapter 2 of book 3 is the players going to Vire, aligning themselves with the priest to Norgorber and defeating these four aspects. And that leads to chapter 3. Once Norgorber realizes that the players are learning all these hidden secrets about him, he summons them all to his divine realm of Duskfathom. And Duskfathom is a impossibly huge cavern beneath the city of Axis in the plains. And I think it has a 3,000 foot ceiling. It has in it the city of Duskfathom is a replica of Vire, and is surrounded by miles of ocean. And if the players have recovered any of the four artifacts that were owned by the manifestations of Norgorber, then those artifacts or rivals to Duskfathom kind of causes reality to warp in such a way that it creates these distinct mindscapes that the players can explore. And these mindscapes unravel even more of Norgorber's secrets and his history as the players explore these mindscapes, assuming that the players have those artifacts in their possession when they are drawn into Duskfathom by Norgorber. After that, they once again come in contact with Norgorber himself. Again, not an avatar of Norgorber, not a manifestation, not any of these other things. It is literally the god Norgorber. He greets them and welcomes them to the city, to his realm, his city of Duskfathom, and he doesn't wish to immediately kill the players. And the reasoning for this is a little bit, because we can't just kill the players. Have to have an adventure, but they at least lay some reasons why Norgorber doesn't just protect his secrets by killing them all as soon as they arrive. And consciously to Norgorber, a lot of that has to deal with the fact that a major deity just died. And with the death of Gorham, Norgorber now believes the rules have changed. And he doesn't necessarily know exactly what the rules are for godhood and their relationship with man and how things are going to be governed and move in the future. So he doesn't want to make a rash decision knowing that, these are now level 19, maybe level 20 characters. Some of them could be clerics to other gods who won't take kindly to Norgorber killing one of one of their most devoted and powerful followers, and so forth. So he wants to find out what the players know, what secrets they've uncovered, and he has a curiosity about the group of players. So what he does is he basically just acts as tour guide and says, I welcome you to my city of Duskfathom. I'm going to take you on a tour. Let's go to the market. And he takes them to the market. And he lets the players shop. And it's probably been a long time since the players have been able to shop and buy gear and whatnot. And he's like, this is a level 20 settlement. Have at it. And then he takes them to a tavern for dinner. It's a very sort of friendly, let me give you a tour of the city. And eventually he takes them to a large lighthouse that at the top of the lighthouse has the best view of the city. And sprinkled throughout this tour, there are little encounters that pop up where Norgorber is evaluating how the players handle it. For example, they have to deal with a pickpocket. And he's also asking them questions and trying to find out what they know. And I think the first question is he just outright asks them, so what secrets have you learned about me? And all of this section is a test where the game is using the victory point subsystem to generate respect points to determine how much Norgorber respects the players. And because he's a god of secrets, if the players just surrender all they know about his secrets, they're going to lose respect in the eyes of Norgorber. But if they protect the secrets that they've learned about Norgorber, they will earn respect points. And ultimately, at the end of this tour through the city, at the top of the lighthouse, the respect points are tallied. If the respect points are very low and Norgorber has no respect for the players, he wipes all of their minds of any knowledge of him, of any secrets they've uncovered, and he just returns them back to Kentargo without any knowledge that any of this transpired. And if they earn a lot of respect points, there's actually a possible ending here where Norgorber says, you know what, I respect, you've earned my respect. I think that my plan to ascend as a pantheon is flawed, and so I'm not going to follow through with that. And more to the point, this is also an area where it's revealed that, again, he doesn't actually have only 4 aspects. He actually has a secret 5th aspect. So even though the players went through Vyre and defeated manifestations of his 4 previously known aspects, there's still one more secret aspect called the Prince of Propaganda. And the Prince of Propaganda is not in Vyre. The Prince of Propaganda is in Duskfathom and is in a replica of Norgorber or Jackster Gorb's childhood home. And that's the location where he has a fragment of Gorham's armor and is attempting to ascend to godhood. So if the players ace every challenge and they get enough respect points, Norgorber actually says, you know what, I'm going to destroy the Prince of Propaganda. It's a mistake to have him. Basically the players, I think they still can proceed to the next chapter, but there's no worry about the Prince of Propaganda. The Prince of Propaganda is dealt with. In the likely scenario, the players fall somewhere between those 2 extremes, then they will have earned enough respect points that Norgorber will reveal to them the existence of the Prince of Propaganda and take them to this replica of the manor that he grew up in, and basically says, I put fate in your hands. I invite you to enter this manor and deal with the Prince of Propaganda. If you succeed, then the Prince of Propaganda was flawed, and my plan was flawed, and never should have been worthy of godhood in the first place. But if you go into the manor and you fail, then that proves to me that the Prince of Propaganda is worthy, and should ascend to godhood, and we'll move forward with the plan to ascend him to godhood into a pantheon. So depending on how many respect points the players accumulate, that influences the DC of all the challenges they encounter in this final set piece. So this begins the final set piece of the entire campaign. When the players enter this manor, the manor is actually divided into 6 distinct encounter locations, although they're not encounters in the way you might think. This is not going to be a dungeon crawl where they have to fight their way through hordes of enemies until they finally arrive at the Prince of Propaganda's final chamber to slay him. Instead, the way this is structured is it uses the infiltration subsystem out of GM Core, and the manor itself is divided into 6 distinct locations, and each of those 6 locations is a different infiltration obstacle for them to deal with. And just like with the regular infiltration system, there are awareness points, and if they generate too many awareness points, then the Prince of Propaganda realizes that they are there and they're a threat, and he comes out and faces them. And if they're able to navigate through all the challenges without raising that awareness point threshold, then they have a opportunity to face the Prince of Propaganda after this section of the 6 different challenges. And the 6 challenges are they're not physical challenges. These are memories of Norgorber back when he was a human, back when he was Jaxter Gorb, that are little mindscapes that the players enter into. And as these are echoes of memories, and they are retelling events that the players were not present for, the players sort of assume the roles of people who were present for these events and were part of the memories, either directly or perhaps even indirectly. So this is a really neat thing to play with, because the overarching theme of this campaign is about the theater. The players are kind of doing a theatrical presentation when they come into these challenges, and they are assuming the roles of people within the memories of Jaxter Gorb. And then ultimately, following this infiltration series of infiltrating, so to speak, through this series of memories of Jaxter Gorb, they do finally have a confrontation with the Prince of Propaganda, which again can play out in a couple of different ways, but probably the most likely is going to be a violent confrontation where you have your big bad evil guy battle at the end, and they can vanquish the Prince of Propaganda and save the realm from the threat of Norgorber ascending as a pantheon. So after that big conclusion, they finally return to Kintargo for just a little bit of an afterword for their adventure. And when they arrive there, they meet their old friend Duval, who you may remember was the Shalenite assistant director who, at the beginning of Book 3, came on board to kind of help get the opera ready. When they return, Duval reveals himself to, in truth, not be a worshiper of Shalen, but to actually be Shalen. So that's one more fun little surprise at the end. The players do not encounter just one literal god; they have encountered 2, and Shalen at the very end, who congratulates them on their accomplishments, both in the theater but also in saving the world from Norgorber, and very appropriately ends by asking the players if there will be a sequel. So that's story time with Dave. That is the story from beginning to end of the Curtain Call Adventure Path. Again, there are some things that I had to leave out just for time. There's a lot to do in book 3 with the secrets of Norgorber, what they are, how you find them out. All I'm going to leave that to people who do lore videos who are much better suited for that topic than I am. But I look forward to seeing what people put together for that. I think that's a better solution than going through all that detail here, because again, I feel like I'm already going long. But I do want to, as usual, talk about things I liked and things that might be areas of concern for me or other people who want to run this adventure path. First, I definitely like this adventure path. I very much enjoyed the story. I enjoyed reading it. I always enjoy um, stories where mortals interact with the gods. The Avatar trilogy in D&D I read when I was like 15 years old. It was like my first big fantasy novel series I read even before Lord of the Rings and all that. So I've always had there's always been a place in my heart for the time of troubles and stories that connect the mortals with the gods. So I have a little bit of a bias here, but I did very much enjoy reading this adventure path. Um, I do think this is very similar to Season of Ghosts, where this is a an adventure path that is very focused on social skills and social challenges. And as such, it's not a campaign I would run with my players, as the majority of my group is much more interested in dungeon crawling, killing the monsters, getting the loot, and that sort of thing, and not so much focused on social challenges. They literally refer to their company of adventurers as Know Diplomacy. That's the name of their group, Know Diplomacy. So this isn't a great fit for my table and in my group. But again, like there are plenty of other options in Pathfinder Second Edition to cater to that sort of view. This is I'll say something. This is something I said about Season of Ghosts, which will repeat here. If anybody is doing an actual play podcast or an actual play YouTube series, do this. Like, this is built for people who really, really, really want to the theatrics of role playing. I think it'll be a great fit for a group like that. And if you are a theater kid and or you have a table full of theater kids, absolutely run this and enjoy it. I also like that they stayed committed to their theme of this is the theater adventure path. Now, there are two parallel stories going on. There's the story of the theater and the story of Norgorber and things happening in Vire. Um, and so um, it's not 100% solely about the theater, but I think is connected enough that it still feels like this is still the theater adventure path, which is unlike Extinction Curse, which I haven't done a video for this channel yet, but I have attempted to GM that campaign twice with two different groups of people, and very disappointed about how that starts out as let's do the circus campaign, and then the circus fades in the background after like book 2. It's not like that with Curtain Call. This is the theater adventure path that continues throughout. Also, I like that this is not a low stakes adventure path. Some of the sentiments I saw online and questions I got after the first video was, if this is about the theater, is this going to be super low stakes, or like what kind of challenges can a level 20 party expect with the theater? And obviously, if you've watched through to this point and not used the chapter skip, you know the answer to that. This this adventure path isn't solely about the theater. It's also about preventing Norgorber from ascending from being a single god to an entire pantheon and what kind of damages that could cause to the world. So it's extremely high stakes, and the players, meet in person not one but two actual gods through this story. Um, so yeah, so this isn't low stakes, even though you think theater maybe not super high stakes. Make no mistake, this is a high stakes adventure path. I also like the way that they presented Norgorber. I like the fact that he is presented as a curious and polite character. We talked a little bit earlier about how he has motives that prevent him from just killing the players at the first opportunity. And yes, to some degree, that's because we want there to be an adventure and we want players to be able to win in the end. But there's actual reasoning behind Norgorber uh, consciously making that decision, and also it's revealed in the story that the four or five different aspects of him kind of subconsciously uh, motivate him in ways that he wasn't aware of, including not being ultra aggressive with our mortal players. Um, in part of this that I like is any way this adventure ends, Norgorber is elevated. So even if the players win, and they may view this as Norgorber being defeated and losing, the reality is he was in truth a fractured deity at the beginning of this story. And even though he doesn't may not ascend as a pantheon, he's no longer fractured. He is now one unified deity that is more powerful than he was before this adventure. And so that's compelling for the narrative moving on as well. So let's talk about a couple of things to consider, areas of concern, and so forth. The prologue section. So at the beginning, it kicks off going into Osirion to uh, track down rumors of your old enemy returning in some fashion. So a couple things to think about there. First is it might feel too soon. Like if you end your first campaign on one game session and you're doing a game session every week or even every other week, and the next game session just kicks off with, hey, guess what? That person you just vanquished in our last session, they're already back and they're causing trouble. Um that I wouldn't want to run it that way. Part of me wishes that maybe they could have worked in something other than the return of your big bad right at the start of this campaign, and maybe found some way to introduce that a little later. Although I do recognize that that is kind of uh, um, setting the tone and everything for what comes afterwards. So it makes sense to have it at the beginning. You might just want to find something to do between those two sessions. The adventure doesn't dictate how much time passes. They recommend a few months so that the legend of the player's accomplishment can spread a little bit. But even if it's a couple of months in game time, it could still be, like, again, just 1 week in real time. So this might be something you want to consider taking a break, play, do a couple sessions of Delta Green, and then come back and pick this up, or find some other way to delay the start. Another thing to consider is that maybe the brainchild isn't the final boss of their previous adventures. Maybe it's a different villain in that saga that the players had a very memorable encounter with. For example, my group that has been going through Abomination Vaults had a very memorable encounter with Voluk Azrene. And so, in Voluk Azrene that you encounter in book one, So maybe it would work out with that group better to say, not that Belcora has returned, he just defeated last week, but Voluk Azumare has reappeared in Osirion. Given that there will be significant time between the last time they saw Voluk, and again, it was a very memorable encounter for the players, they might get more excited about that as opposed to, oh, come on, we just took care of Belcora. Now we got to go do this again. So just things to think about. Now the downside to that is the opera is supposed to be about the big villain. So it wouldn't make sense for Voluk to be the topic of the opera, and I wouldn't have Voluk be the being that comes back as the Risen Nemesis in the third book. But that might be something that to consider, something like that, if you have a concern about players not being excited to find out that the person they just finished off is already returned. Also, I've saw online, I flipped through some of the official forums and so forth. Some people are saying that they just don't like the beginning being set in Osirion, because their villain has no connection to it. So, like using Belcora as an example, why would Belcora choose Osirion of all places to reappear? She has no history, no connection to it. And I believe James Jacobs commented on the official forum saying that that's part of the reason why they chose Osirion is because none of the existing level 1 to level 11 adventure paths have a strong connection to Osirion. So by setting the nemesis there, or the return of your nemesis there, they don't risk stepping on any other narrative toes, because this is an area that's not really connected to the current level 1 to level 11 adventure paths that are out there. And another thing that I won't say is anything to be overly concerned about, I just feel like is a weird creative choice, is they set up this red herring in the Cult of the Ashen Man. In the first book and into the second book, you encounter the final Herald of the Ashen Man, and the Cult of the Ashen Man is sabotaging the stage production, and you eventually discover that they're doing it because they've been sort of hired by the Church, or either hired or manipulated by the Church of Norgorber to do these things. And I don't understand. I don't see the need for the red herring. I think maybe they might have approached this from the viewpoint of the players know that Curtain Call is part of the God's Reign prophecies, is connected to that meta narrative that's going across different adventures and so forth. So they may be expecting to encounter a god. And so, with this being an adventure that takes place in Cantargo, maybe it makes sense to include this reference to Asmodeus, because the players might think that we're going to be, this is a sequel to Hell's Rebels, and we're going to be, encountering Asmodeus. That's going to be our big bad. And then have it twisted on them that no, it's not Asmodeus, it's actually Norgorber. I don't know if that's the reason why they included the Ashen Man. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know why there is the need for the red herring. I think they could have just had the Church of Norgorber be doing these things, and it would have worked out fine. But like I said, that's not a huge complaint. That's not necessarily saying anything's wrong. Just something that struck out as me as weird that I just didn't really grasp onto the need for that. I did see some people ask on the forums about the tonal changes, where in book 3, in the first chapter of book 3, you're in the opera, you have your big show, and then you take a hard left turn to saving the world from Norgorber. My personal take on this is I don't think it's going to be that jarring, because they have laid in interactions with the Church of Norgorber and going to Vire. So I think there's been enough in the narrative that's been laid out that is not going to is not going to be such a tonal change that it would truly bother Pathfinder players. So I wouldn't worry about that, but I do mention it because I did see that concern raised online. And a couple of questions that came up, just a few here, and most of them I'm probably going to skip because I think I've already kind of talked about. For example, questions about like, is this high stakes enough for level 20? But one of the questions was about combat. So as I mentioned, this is a an adventure that is leaning to the strengths of social challenges, social interactions. Great for RP-minded groups and quote-unquote theater kids. But the question is there going to be enough combat to satisfy people who aren't invested in the social challenges and so forth? I guess my answer, I'm not going to answer that directly. I'm just going to say that if your table is not gung-ho about social encounters and role playing, I personally would not bring this to that table. I think this is going to be a campaign that really shines when everybody is on board and wanting to have a theatrical role playing experience. Now don't get twisted. That doesn't mean there's no combat. There's plenty of combat in the game. Although they do make efforts to have social challenges be the what decides a narrative moment more than combat. For example, the final set piece of the whole adventure is not a dungeon crawl that you hack and slash your way through. It is one in which you have to solve problems through role playing and social skills, and then you get to have, or possibly have, depending on how everything falls out, your big bad evil guy final confrontation. So I won't say that there's not enough combat or so on and so forth, but again, if your table is not super into social play, I'd say there's plenty of other great options out there in the catalog to consider. And the other question is, again, the same question I always get when we talk about adventure paths that are not 6 books long, which is what APs recommend to run before this. Honestly, literally anything if you think your players will enjoy it. This is designed in such a way that the Nemesis and the Risen Nemesis can be customized and tailor-made to whoever your big bad villain was. I'll just echo something that I said in video 1, which is this is a campaign that I think really benefits from having played levels 1 through 11 first. And this is not a campaign that you should say, I want to do the theater campaign. Let's roll fresh new level 11 characters and dive in. Absolutely not. You want there to be an experience before that. It doesn't necessarily have to be 1 to 11, but you need to play long enough to have had a big bad evil guy and defeated them and created a legend so that can then inform everything that comes after it in Curtain Call. And also questions about if you wanted to run, I think it was a Return to Sandpoint that doesn't go to level 11, it goes to level 12. That was a question that popped up on the official forums. And the advice I was given there, I agree with, and I'll just share here as well, which is if you played that and it ended at 12, or you played anything else and ended at 12 instead of 11, one option is just to skip the first chapter of book 1, where your Nemesis has returned in Osirion, and just go straight into chapter 2 of book 1, where Fallenta reaches out to the players and say, "Hey, I heard the legend of your heroics, and I want to talk to you about making an opera about it." Now, that is not to say that you should skip that prologue piece, or that it's not good or there's no value. But if you are wanting to figure out how to work in characters who are level 12, that's probably the most reasonable way to do it, as opposed to trying to restructure the way experience is handed out and playing through that first part. So there you have it, my part 2 overview for prospective GMs for the Curtain Call Adventure Path. If you have any other questions about this campaign, please leave them in the comments below. And as always, I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everybody out there who supports me and this channel, whether you do that by clicking the like button, leaving comments, subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the Patreon. I greatly appreciate what you folks do to support me. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.